This conference will now be recorded.
Oh, and I should have referenced that we were going to record this conference. So thank you, Amanda, who's working on the backside of this, keeping us intact here. But we intend to hopefully share this, possibly through our website or something like that for folks to view in the future. So the county's comprehensive plan, it's called Places 2040. This plan was adopted by the Board of Commissioners in 2018 after a 3-year process of seeking input from the public. There were about 8,000 people who either attended meetings, provided comments, a lot of social media engagement at this point in time as well. So a lot of public involvement in the development of this plan. And the entire plan can be found at www.places2040.com. The vision is based on the fact that we all feel some connection to the county, whether it's the farmland, whether it's the vibrant urban centers, or just the culture. And that's really what makes this county unique and unlike every other place, and why our community wants to keep it that way. But there's concerns. Development is rapid. Population is expected to grow by 100,000 people in the next 20 years. And we continue to see the loss of our most productive farmland. This plan, being a collaborative regional approach, really has the opportunity to ensure Lancaster County that we all love is here for generations to come. Advance here a bit. So the plan has 8 priorities and 5 big ideas. Those big ideas are creating great places, connecting people, place, and opportunity, taking care of what we have, growing responsibly, and thinking beyond boundaries. Today, we're going to talk primarily about taking care of what we have, although Farmland Preservation also is a tool to ensure that we grow responsibly. And I'm just scrolling down through these. Again, on the Places 24 website, you can actually go in and dive into the full plan or the executive summary. But just to provide you some overview, we do have some visuals here to help facilitate that. But we certainly we don't intend for you to read through the text of what you're currently seeing. It's really just as a reference point. So there's really 4 areas of specific emphasis that are relevant for today's discussion, and that is place-based planning and analysis, where we really look beyond political boundaries and plan at a different scale. We really plan to a community, a corridor, and a landscape scale. And historically, that really hasn't happened. We look at our jurisdictional boundaries, our municipal boundaries, as sort of, the limitation in which local control can have. And under the municipal planning code, there's some merit to that, but there are opportunities as well to think beyond those boundaries, especially as we look at land use implications. And the next is simplified zoning. And this is where we have a greater consistency and understanding of zoning ordinances across municipalities that lead to the communities, the corridors, and the landscapes that we want to see. And then we have the utilization of official maps, which are really a means of illustrating where future improvements are most appropriate, where transportation, both motorized and non-motorized connections are needed, and also showing our most critical natural resources to protect. If we complete these maps at a regional level rather than municipality by municipality, it really provides a more holistic view of what the future of Lancaster County will look like. And then finally, aligning resources. And this is really the concept of taking the talent, technical resources, and funding opportunities and aligning them around the big ideas and the policies of the plan. And for Lancaster Farmland Trust, obviously aligning our resources in terms of where we deploy dollars to preserve farms and ensuring that that is consistent with the county's overall objectives is one of those examples of aligning resources. And you'll see later on when Jeb speaks about our ranking criteria, how that may factor into that moving forward. So another sort of important element to understand as part of this plan are what are being defined as character zones, and really think of it as transitions of different uses. So if you look on your screen to the right, the urban core, that would be someplace like downtown Lancaster City, where it's sort of the center of business activity, 10, 20-story buildings, things of that nature. But then as you transition out of the city, and think about this, if you are coming out Walnut Street or Chestnut Street or up Queen Street, you can start to see the transition where height of buildings starts to go down. You see more residential uses, some attached, some are detached. And then you transition out of that into more of the suburban area where you start seeing the traditional subdivisions. You may start to see box stores, things of that nature, less density. And then as you continue to progress out there, you hit your rural community, which is going to be, where your small villages, sort of your crossroads, intersections, and then you have your agriculture also as a part of that, but where we have our opportunities of very productive agricultural land, and then obviously you have natural areas that are a component of that as well. So you can think about sort of this tradition or this transition out through there. These character zones are not zoning designations or districts themselves, but they really can serve as a guide for how the county should be zoned moving forward based on what those current uses are. So this, what you're seeing right now, is the future land use and transportation map. I think this is a really good overview and visual based on the entire plan, and sort of what the overall objectives are. So if I can get my drawing tools to work here. So okay, a couple technical difficulties, but we'll see if this works. So in the center around Lancaster City, you can see sort of that gray area that's coming out around there. That's the urban growth area, and then extends out. You can see up towards Lidditz Borough and Manheim Borough, out to Mount Joy. You can see along Route 23, you have an urban growth area running along that corridor. And this is ideally where we want our growth to go. Urban growth areas are not new. They've been around for 20+ years at this point, but it's really where we want to direct our growth. Also on this map, as you start to see, if you look out on the eastern side here, out around New Holland, where it says the Eastern Lancaster County Cultural Landscape, and you can see the greenish colors are the natural areas, and this map is really, it's a visual piece, so it's not, doesn't accurately represent where these boundaries are, but more as just a visual of representation. And you can see these tan areas in here being the areas that we want to permanently protect. We want to permanently preserve that farmland. Likewise, down in the southern end, in the Quarryville area and beyond, you can also see those tan areas, but you can also start to see a lighter shade, which are being defined as conservation areas, also viable farmland. But as you'll see later, may not be adjacent to existing preserve farms, and therefore might not be the highest priority in terms of where we deploy resources to permanently protect agricultural land. So again, focusing on the urban growth areas, from 2002 to 2015, 78% of new homes that were built were inside of the urban growth areas. which is an improvement from 1994 to 2001, where we saw 72% of new homes built. But it's still less than the 85% that was targeted in the county's previous comprehensive plan. We're also consuming more land in our urban growth areas than necessary because we're building at lower densities. From 2002 to 2015, the average residential density in the urban growth area was 4.4 dwelling units per acre, which was much lower than the 7.5 units per acre that was the target within the plan. So what that means is between those years, we consumed 70% more land than really what was necessary to accommodate our growth needs. And you can start to see if that continues and these growth areas fill up, how it starts to put pressure on our outside surrounding rural and agricultural areas. So within our current urban growth areas, we have about 28,000 acres of buildable land that can accommodate residential and non-residential development. But it is important to note that inside those urban growth areas, we only have 140 parcels that are over 40 acres in size, which does start to present some challenges for accommodating the growth needs of business and industry that might have specific infrastructure needs. And in many cases, some of those parcels that are 40 acres or over in size really do not have the infrastructure to support that. So it's something to be mindful of moving forward. And another challenge that we have is that about 17,000 acres of land are zoned for large lot suburban development outside of the urban growth areas. And to accommodate this growth, we really only need about 8,400 acres. So again, we're consuming more land than necessary to accommodate our residential needs. We need to build more compactly and efficiently and try and achieve the average of that 7.5 dwelling units per acre inside of our urban growth areas. So we're gonna move on to the farmland preservation strategy within the plan. So today there are about 1,500 preserved farms representing 112,000 acres of farmland preserved in the county. This is due to the combined efforts of Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board. Great relationship and partnership between the two entities. You know, we're constantly referring landowners to one entity or the other, really whichever one is going to serve that particular landowner's needs the best. Of the land that's permanently preserved, it represents about 27% of all the farms and almost 30% of all the ag zoned land in the county, which is significant, especially as you start looking at other parts of the Commonwealth and across the nation in terms of farmland preservation. For a county with a size of total of about 600,000 acres and to have 30% of all of its ag zoned land permanently preserved is extraordinary, but also a lot of work still left to do. And the goal of this plan is to increase the acreage of contiguous protected land, and that's really focusing on those farms that are adjacent to existing preserved farmland. We know just by our interactions with farmers on most days on a daily basis, not here over the last couple of weeks, but we know that they're more apt to preserve their farm if they know a neighboring farm is also preserved. And you'll see some notations on these maps. So you'll see the priority areas for preservation, these areas in yellow. And what the county did here is they went through an analysis and they took all of the existing preserved farmland, which are these shapes here shown in sort of this bluish green color. They looked at those and then they said, okay, we want to focus on parcels that are 10 acres in size or larger and that have at least 90% agricultural land use land covered and are adjacent to an existing preserved farm. And when they went through that analysis, these yellow parcels, and these all represent individual farms or individual parcels, appear. And in this case, which is in the northwestern region of the county, you know, the priority areas are a little over 14,000 acres. There's already, you know, over 33,000 acres preserved there, but these priority areas represent an additional 14,000 acres. It doesn't mean that areas outside of this, and in some of the other maps you'll be able to see this more clearly, aren't important. It just means in terms of if we have to prioritize where we're going to invest limited resources, it makes sense to build these contiguous blocks. So moving down, so this is the northeast planning area. Obviously in the top section, you hit a lot of state-owned land, a lot more forest land up there. So naturally you're not going to see a lot of area up there as a priority. But you can see here existing preserve farms is about 13,000 acres, priority areas of an additional about 8,500 acres there. Here in the east planning area is where you can start to see some of those larger gaps. And this is primarily really just based on the fact that there hasn't been as much farmland preservation activity out in the eastern side of the county in comparison to some other areas. And there's a couple of variables for that. But you can see here, especially out on the eastern side, you get a very large open area that doesn't show any priority areas. And again, it doesn't mean that it's not good farmland. And actually, you know, I look at this as really as an opportunity. It's an opportunity where Lancaster Farmland Trust and the Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board probably needs to put some more effort into our outreach and education to engage with those landowners and farmers out there to hopefully encourage them to preserve their land. Because if we can start to get a few farms preserved out here, and if you would run this analysis again, you're going to start to see larger blocks of opportunity that appear out here. And then the last map that we have here, as it's trying to populate, is of the southern planning area. And again, very similar to the northwest, where you have a lot of preserved farmland out here. Sort of less priority areas because so much already has been preserved. I'm going to move past this map because it appears it still is not populating very well. And then this one. Just give me a second here to get this one resized. I'll bring it back in a moment here. Okay. So this map here is showing all the preserved farms in Lancaster County. Again, you can see on the eastern side there, you don't have the density of preserved farms that you have in the northwestern area. But this is a really good visual as we transition, speak a little bit about the history of Lancaster Farmland Trust, and then Jeb's going to take over at that point. So Lancaster Farmland Trust was established in 1988 as a private nonprofit alternative to the county. Farmland Preservation Program. To date, we preserved 513 farms, over 31,600 acres. We have 50 farms and 4,000 acres on our waiting list. The demand for farmland preservation has never been higher. We really see that farmers want to protect their farms, and especially over the last, 8 to 10 years, as development pressure has started to increase, we've seen that interest in farmland preservation go even higher. We work with any farmer to preserve their farm, but most of our work has been with the Amish and Mennonite communities. Annually, about 85% of our work is with these members of the community. We rely heavily on private support, that being individuals, businesses, and foundations. And unlike other programs that protect natural lands, we do not have access to any state funding for farmland preservation. We have been fortunate that the Lancaster County Commissioners have valued the work of Lancaster Farmland Trust this year and for the past 14 years, and have approved a challenge grant. This year, they will match every dollar we raise up to $250,000. But the true champions of farmland preservation really are the farmers. They're the ones that are making the perpetual commitment that their farm will always be a farm moving forward. The value of the easements that Lancaster Farmland Trust holds is appraised at more than $95.6 million. But our farmers have only received $16.7 million in compensation. So what that means is that our farmers have given up almost $80 million worth of development value on their farms, which they were not compensated for, which again just really speaks to their passion for wanting to protect their land. And with that, I'm going to transition it over to Jeb, who's going to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Jeff. Again, as Jeff mentioned, my name is Jeb Musser. I'm the Director of Land Protection at Lancaster Farmland Trust. So I kind of oversee all of our programmatic activities. So obviously our farmland preservation program, but also our water quality work that we work through, and some other aspects. So I have a great staff of 3 others that work with me, and we certainly enjoy the work that we do. So I'm going to pick up where Jeff left off, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. Get my slideshow started. So feel free to let Amanda in the chat know if something's not showing up right. But you should be able to see my PowerPoint here. It says farmland preservation at the top. So just a few more kind of points that Jeff covered some of these already. So over 1,500 farms, somewhere between 112, 115,000 acres preserved in the county between both organizations, so the county and Lancaster Farmland Trust. Raffo Township, so up in between kind of the Mount Joy, Manheim area there, has the most acreage of preserved farmland, with over 8,200 acres preserved. While East Donegal Township, so kind of the other side of Mount Joy in the Marietta area, has the highest percentage of its land preserved, with nearly 50% of the total township land area is preserved farmland. So, and as Jeff mentioned, Lancaster Farmland Trust, we do work all over the county, but we do most of our farms are concentrated really in the eastern part of the county. And I ran some numbers yesterday. So actually, the township that has the most trust preserved acreage is Salisbury Township. So that's really it's a component that we've done a lot of work in Salisbury Township, but it's also a very large township in the eastern part of the county. So that's out in the Gap area, north of Gap. Some other ones that where we have a lot of preserved acreage are Laycock Township, so the Intercourse area, and then Coleraine Township down in the southeastern side of Lancaster County, near the Chester County border, have a fair amount actually a large amount of preserved farms down in that area. So I'm going to expand on the map that Jeff pulled up a little bit. I have a map, a web map here. So the yellow areas here are preserved, are all farms, but the green areas here are all preserved farms. So really a pretty key strategy of the Farmland Trust, and really the county as well, through their scoring system, are preserving these large contiguous blocks of farms. It helps towards creating viable agricultural in these communities if you have lots of farms near each other that are protected, and not necessarily just a donut hole surrounded by development. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple of different areas here. One area here that we've done a lot of work in over the past few years is in East Lampeter Township along Route 30. So to get your bearings, and I think everybody can probably see my mouse here. Here's Rockville, the Rockville outlets, Tanger outlets up here. So you're coming down Route 30. Remember, sorry, the legend is not showing up when I share my screen, but all the yellow farms, those are all non-preserved farms. So the green here is preserved farms. So this we kind of call our East Lampeter Greenway project. You can see we have about 7 or 8 farms, depending where you cut it off, creating a nice block of farmland there, right on the kind of the outside of where development ends there in East Lampeter Township. So through working with the township and farmers in that area, it's something that everybody kind of wanted to see happen. They really saw that Rockville outlet kind of really as where they want development to stop, at least along that corridor. I think a lot of people that visit Lancaster County and live in Lancaster County may think of this Route 30 corridor when they're driving into Lancaster City. They see or driving out of Lancaster City, even they see that. It's kind of the first stretch of farmland they might see if they're going down 30. Some other areas, obviously, that are large blocks of preserved farmland. So up here, this is the East Donegal Township area. You can see kind of a large sea of green. This is really kind of where farmland preservation originated in Lancaster County. There was a lot of strong proponents of farmland preservation in this area, had farms in this area that did a lot of work back in the early days, and it really kind of took off in this area, and still farms are getting preserved here to this day. So really strong farmland preservation efforts in this northwestern part of the county, creating some nice large contiguous blocks of farmland. And then really, they're doing due to the fact that we have 1,500 farms preserved, there actually are, you can zoom into most areas in the county and find some of these blocks. So here's an example out in Carnarvon Township in the northeastern side of Lancaster County. Kind of a nice set of maybe 10 to 15 farms in this area, creating a nice block of preserved farmland. So that's really a goal of both organizations. And then as we go into my portion of my presentation on our scoring system, you'll see how we incorporate those large blocks, accounting for those large blocks within our scoring system. So we developed an in-house scoring system. The most recent update to it we did in 2015, and that's what we're still using to this day. We call it our Land Evaluation Site Assessment, or for short, LESA, scoring system. Really, the goal of this was there was a couple different goals. Kind of first and foremost, really was to provide an objective way for our board and our staff to be viewing farms and comparing them to one another, but also being able to have a system to then offer a payment, a dollar amount payment to a farmer when we're preserving his or her farm. So, like I mentioned, uses a guide for the board and our land protection committee, which is a subcommittee of the board made up of board members and non-board members. That's really a recommending body to our full board. So they view it first. They use this scoring system to score a farm, see how high quality of a piece of property it is for preservation, and then offer a payment range and recommend that to our board. It can also be used to prioritize projects. So in a situation where we may have funding, a funder who really wants to preserve a farm in a certain watershed or a certain municipality, we could pull farms on our waiting list and run them through this scoring system to maybe, give a donor an option on maybe which farm they may want to donate towards the preservation. And given that, there's a limit on resources, there's limited time, there's limited staff, it really is, it really saves us a lot of effort in that area to have a system we can go to every time a farm comes in that's fair and that's consistent for each property. The way it's broken down, and I'll go over each section here in the following slides, are it's broken into 4 categories. Actually, now it's 5 categories. That's wrong there, totaling 100 points, and then a bonus category totaling 10 points. So the first category, and the category that gets the top amount of points allocated to it, is the soil category. So we look at what types of soils are on the property and what their classification level is. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture goes through every so many years and creates a soil survey of the United States. And for Pennsylvania's soil survey and Lancaster County soil survey, they've determined different classes of soil. So classes 1 and 2 are determined as the most prime agricultural soils. So these are soils that are really good for farming, probably not on steep slopes, not very rocky, those kind of things. Those are the highest class soils. And then class 3 and 4, also great farming soils, just not quite at that threshold of the class 1 and 2 soils, just kind of a step down, but are still deemed as soils of statewide importance. And in Lancaster County, frankly, we have some of the best soils in the country, definitely the best soils, some of the best soils in Pennsylvania. So most of our farms at least have some portion of them that are in class 1 and 2 soils. And it's very rare that we have a farm that doesn't have any class 1 through 4 soils. That actually, I don't even really recall that ever happening, unless maybe it was a wooded parcel or something like that. So if a farm has 80% class 1 and 2 soils on it, it gets full points in our system, 30 out of 30. And then you see it steps down from there. So if 60% of the farm is in class 1 and 2 soils, it gets 25 out of 30. Still a pretty good score, just not quite 30 out of 30. And then letters C and D has greater than half the farm is in classes 1 through 4, 20 points, and if greater than 40% is in class 1 through 4, 15 points. If it's anything less than that, it would get 0 out of 30. Like I said, that does not happen very often at all, in Lancaster County at least. Second category, so we put a lot of points in this category, just 5 less than soils, broken down into 2 main sections in development pressure. How close is the farm to a designated growth area, or as Jeff, really they're called a urban growth boundary. So Jeff went over those when he was going over the Lancaster County comprehensive plan. So areas the county's designated where they want to direct future growth, or how close is it to a township zoning designation that's not compatible with agriculture. So commercially zoned land, residential zoned land, industrial zoned land. So anything obviously that's not agriculture, and really is a zoning designation intended for growth, we're looking at those. So if a farm is directly adjacent to an urban growth boundary or a non-ag zoning designation, if the neighboring property, if that's the case on the neighboring property, it gets 20 out of 20 points. Again, similar to the soils category, it kind of steps down from there. If it's not directly adjacent to one, but it's within half mile of a property that's maybe a commercial property, would get 15 out of 20 points. And then again, keep stepping down. Within 1 mile, gets 5 points out of 20. If it's outside of that 1 mile radius, it would get a 0 out of 20 there. Where the other 5 points come in is in the next section there, road frontage. So if a property has 2,000 or greater feet of road frontage, it gets 5 out of 5 points. And then between 500 and 2,000 basically would get 2 out of 5 points. Anything less than 500, so if it's a landlocked parcel or it has less than 500 feet of road frontage, it would get 0 out of 5 points for that section. And really the thinking behind this is a property that has kind of a large amount of road frontage, in theory, could be easier to develop in the future, as opposed to a landlocked parcel that would likely be more difficult to develop. So the goal about this section is to prioritize those projects that are under the most or the highest development pressure, using some objective criteria. This is where you see some of our, what I mentioned about our clustering of contiguous blocks of preserved farmland in this section. So we call it the larger section, we call it our farm viability section. How viable is this piece of property to remain a farm in perpetuity? Is it in a farming community? Is it surrounded by other preserved farms? Is it large? Is it actually have good tillable land and pasture on it? So you can see here, we do prioritize larger parcels. So if it's greater than 75 acres, it gets 10 out of 10 points, and steps down from there between 50 and 74, 8 points, between 25 and 49, 5 points. If 75% or more of the property is in tillable or pasture land, 5 out of 5 points for that category, and then you can see it steps down to 3 and 2 points from there. Any property that has less than 25% cropland or pasture land on it does not get any points for that particular subcategory. And then finally, really where the clustering comes in is this third subcategory of the farm viability section, being how close is this piece of property to other preserved lands or other applicants for preservation. So we do look at applicants in this section, just recognizing that those farms, hopefully will likely get preserved at some point in time. They're interested in preserving, just have not gotten finalized yet. So if a farm's directly next to another preserved farm or an applicant, it gets full 20 out of 20 points for that section. Again, similar to other categories as it breaks down. If it's within a half mile, maybe it's not directly adjacent to another preserved farm, but it is within a half mile of another preserved farm, gets 10 points, and then within 1 mile gets 5 points. Due to the fact that there has been so much work in Lancaster County as far as farmland preservation goes, it is fairly rare to have a property that is not at least within 1 mile of another preserved farm or an applicant. It doesn't happen very often at all. And then this section here really, this was added back when we revamped this scoring system back in 2015. The trust has in the past 10 to 15 years or so become really involved in kind of the water quality efforts going on in Lancaster County. Recognizing there's a decent amount of pressure, you probably read about it in the Lancaster newspaper or Lancaster Farming. Decent amount of pressure in Lancaster County on agriculture to help be the solution to water quality issues in local waterways, the Susquehanna River, but ultimately the Chesapeake Bay. That's kind of the big push. So we recognize that once a farm is preserved, that doesn't end our relationship with farmers. Oftentimes we can be a service to farmers over the years. If they want to make water quality improvements to their farms, we can provide technical resources to them, funding, or at least help them get a plan to move forward, or direct them maybe to a local engineer or someone like that who'd be able to help them make these kind of improvements to their property to improve water quality and soil erosion. So with that, we did add a water category to our LISA scoring system. So if a farm is located in the headwaters, so if it's in a headwater, if it's in the upper reaches of a particular watershed, it gets 5 out of 5 points there. And then you can see the breakdown. We give a total of 5 points for stream frontage. So if it has a greater 2,000 feet or greater stream frontage, 5 out of 5 points, and then 500 to 2,000 feet of stream frontage would get 3 out of 5. So I mean, compared to the other categories, not a whole lot of points, but we do want to recognize that if a farm has a lot of water resources on it, it can potentially provide the opportunity for us to work with that farmer to make improvements to the stream, or some of the practices that are causing maybe some pollutants or soil to run into the stream. So that is included. And then I inserted the slide at the wrong spot here. Actually, no, this is what I wanted to do. Should trust myself. So these are just some examples of some water quality improvements in projects we've been a part of. So you can see, this lot was very, heavily used on the left-hand side, heavily used by livestock. Not a whole lot of vegetation on there. So we were able to, this farmer was able to have a dedicated concrete lot built for his animals that then allowed them to not have to spend as much time in this pasture land. Also, we're able to reseed, do some minor regrading of this pasture to really help with manure issues as well as runoff issues. And then you can see here, just on the left, some continued really heavy use of that area, causing a lot of kind of mucky, muddy mess. And during heavy rainstorms, a lot of that would run off. On the right-hand side, you can see in the kind of the forefront there, a little bit of a runoff of directing stormwater, but really the key point of this picture in the background, that's a new building and a lot area for those animals, so they don't have to spend quite as much time in kind of that dedicated heavy use area. So just some examples of some water quality things we can work through with farmers. And then the last kind of category, although it doesn't get applied in every case, obviously because it's a bonus category, we have kind of 10 different things we can look at. Really, there's a few of them that come up more often than others. So number one, they're geographically located in an area where there's no other preserve farms within 1 mile radius. As I mentioned before, this doesn't really happen too often anymore, but occasionally it does come up. If the size of the property is in excess of 100 acres, that's a really large piece of land, and from our standards, our average really is kind of a 60-acre farm. So something in excess of 100 acres, that's a good investment for us. So we do tack on an extra 3 bonus points there. Located in a natural heritage area, not to go into too much detail on what a natural heritage area is, but really it's areas where there are kind of key species of either plants or animals, key kind of habitat corridors that have been designated as really kind of important areas. And so if some of those happen to be located on a farm, we give 3 points to that as well. And then you can see there's kind of some other categories, that historical significance, opportunity for floodplain restoration, some other things that really they occasionally will get applied, but not as often as really those top 3. And these are really kind of at our board's discretion. They don't necessarily automatically get assigned. We have the conversation with our committee and our board, and they ultimately will decide if it's appropriate to apply these bonus points. So the next set of slides here, I'm going to go over some ranking, some scorings of different farms, show you how different properties score. The first one here is one that scores 100 out of 100 in our system. So in theory, one of the best farms to preserve if you go solely off of our scoring system. So you can see this first map here. This is our soils map. So it's got, almost entirely class 2 soils, which if you remember, if it's over 80% class 1 or 2 soils, gets full soils points. It's on this third or fourth map here, you can see the farm is here in this kind of pink cross pattern here. It's directly adjacent to this blue area here, which if you look at the legend is an area that is zoned by the township for rural residential use. So since it's directly adjacent to that, it gets full 20 out of 20 points there because there's some development and pressure that's right next to that farm. It has over 2,000 feet of road frontage. It's over 75 acres. It's over 75% tillable cropland and pasture. It's directly adjacent to multiple preserved farms. So you can see the green here, those are Lancaster Farmland Trust preserved farms. The brown are Lancaster County Ag Preserve Board farms, and the yellow are applicants with the Ag Preserve Board. So it's right up against a few Lancaster Farmland Trust preserved farms. So again, creating those contiguous blocks. It's located in headwaters, and it has over 2,000 feet of stream frontage. So it gets full points actually in every category, because it did not get any bonus points. So in the typical categories, it is getting full points. This farm here kind of scores middle of the road. You can see all class 1 and 2 soils. Where it loses points, and I'll just focus on where it loses points, is you can see on these two maps, it's in kind of a sea of other farmland, of preserved farmland, which is good for building contiguous blocks, but it does not get any points really for development pressure because it's not really adjacent to any development pressure. It's within a mile of an urban growth boundary over here, and it's within a mile of some zoning types that aren't ag, but it's not directly adjacent. So it loses points, still gets 86 out of 100 though, still pretty good. This one here, and for sake of time, I'm gonna go through this one fairly quickly. Again, another 100 out of 100 here. Good soils, large farm, building contiguous blocks of preserved farmland. It's gonna create another green block here within this sea of green, and it is directly adjacent to an urban growth area. So another great farm to preserve. Not that they're all not great, but just provides something for us to base our decisions off of. And then the last one here, it doesn't score quite as good in our system. It's a smaller parcel, only 35 acres. Soil types are good, but not over that threshold of class 1 and 2 soils. Again, it's kind of in a heavy ag area, which is good for building contiguous blocks, but not really close to very many development pressures. All the development pressures and zoning types that aren't ag are outside of that 1 mile radius. So it scores a 57 out of 100. Doesn't mean we won't preserve it. It just scores a little lower in our system. Scoring breakdown, really a key use of the scoring breakdown is wherever a property scores, that really bases our decision off of what are we going to offer. If a farmer is interested in a payment for preservation of his or her farm, what are we going to offer? So you can see anyone that scores over 90 is getting we would offer $1,500 per acre, and it tiers down from there. And our board will offer a payment somewhere within these ranges. You can see 80 to 89 is $1,350 to $1,440 per acre, and it breaks down from there. The question we get very often is what's your average payment? I'd say our average payment per acre is around $1,100. So that would mean our average farm scores somewhere in this 70 to 79 acre range. And that's all I have. I think we have a little bit of time for question and answer, so I will pass it back to either Jeff or Amanda, who's going to be handling that. Thank you, everyone.
Amanda, if you want to unmute everyone, and then again, if you have a question, feel free to speak up. If you don't, please just keep your phone muted so we don't get a lot of background noise.
Hi, this is Harvey Abrams. Thank you so much. So you finished the presentation with the price you pay per acreage. So is that it? Is that sort of the end of the transactional relationship with the farmer and the trust? Do they have any obligation back to the trust, for instance?
Yeah, actually, the preservation of the farm is really the beginning of the relationship. When we acquire an easement permanently preserving that farm, We then have a perpetual responsibility to, one, monitor that easement, and two, enforce that easement, regardless of who the owner of that property is. So the actual preservation, while that's what everybody gets excited about because it's a new farm that's preserved, which obviously is great, that's really the beginning of the relationship, because once we acquire that, for as long as we can foresee in the future, we have to enforce and monitor that easement.
I guess I'll ask another question. What's happened to Pedal to Preserve? I know that was suspended last year, or at least it was in a virtual format. Is it going to resume in its regular format in 2020, once we can get out of the house?
Yeah, and we were not planning on hosting Pedal to Preserve this year. And really, as that particular event has evolved, we started to run into some complications that really, at the end of the day, from a financial perspective, just didn't seem to make a lot of sense for the organization. It was great community exposure, and we had a lot of conversation about the loss of that community exposure, but seeking liability insurance started to become problems with that. A lot of the local police departments who historically would have provided their service pro bono either started charging fees or just outright would not provide that service and having to rely on other contracted service for that. And when we started looking at limited resources and where should we be investing those resources, at the end of the day, we didn't think that the event provided enough of a revenue stream based on the amount of input that it took. Not to say it won't come back in the future, that's certainly possible, but there's some communication out there. The trust is in the silent phase of a capital campaign, and to be successful there, we knew we had to pull back in some areas.
But thank you very much. I appreciate that explanation.
Absolutely.
Jeff, this is Amanda.
Yes.
A question that came in before this from somebody that's in attendance today was, what do you think is the biggest challenge or multiple challenges in terms of farmland preservation?
I would say, one of the biggest demand for the program is, and interest is not a challenge. Having the level of funding necessary to meet the demand is always a challenge. And I think, for any nonprofit, having the financial resources to meet the needs and of the mission, can always be problematic. So that's certainly a challenge. It's one of the reasons why the trust decided to launch a capital campaign to try and exhaust that backlog of 50 farms and 4,000 acres that's on our list. I think the other challenge moving forward is, as through this presentation, the county is going to experience 100,000 new people over the next 20 years. And Lancaster County is a great place to live. And a lot of people have moved here. And being able to accommodate that growth moving forward, and ensuring we're not consuming our viable agricultural land is going to be a challenge. And it's going to take a lot of advocacy work by the community to stress to their public officials that we want to make sure we protect this land in perpetuity. So, those are some of the challenges that are out there. Any other questions from any of those who are still on the call? Well, if not, we thank you for your time and your interest in this topic. Thank you for your interest in Lancaster Farmland Trust. If you do have suggestions for future webinars, please reach out to us. You can either reach out to myself or Jeb, or go to our website and reach out to Laura Brenner, who's our communications coordinator, and let us know what you might be interested in. We'd like to continue to do this moving forward. We want to make sure that we're offering topics that are relevant and that folks want to hear about. So please feel free to offer your suggestions related to that. So I hope you all are safe and well. Encourage you to continue to practice social distancing, but certainly get outside, enjoy the nice day that we have today. I know my wife and my kids, we're looking forward to going on a bike ride here this afternoon at some point. So until we can meet face to face, we wish you the best and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Goodbye.